All right, you should be seeing live.
And we are live. Um, Good evening, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Vano. Welcome to my studio, which is also a small corner of my bedroom. I am going to be working on a watercolor painting of Chief Thunderwater, Supreme Chief of Peace. We'll talk a little bit about that while I'm doing it. And I've recently switched mainly to watercolors from acrylic paints. I used to work mainly with acrylics, and I would use palette knives. So this is kind of a very different process for me. But since I've set my studio up in my bedroom in our new home, I don't want to get acrylic paint everywhere. And since nobody wants to look at my face, I'm going to point you down at the painting here, and we'll get started. So I'm on Instagram as Jeffrey Vano Art, and you can find me over there. And if you want to go look at it, I've been posting progress pictures all day of this particular piece. I stretched the paper a few days ago, and I let it dry thoroughly, so we should get a nice flat paper. We want to avoid buckling, and if you don't stretch it properly, you end up with paper that's going to be all warped, and the paint will pool, and that's not at all what we want. What I tend to do is, because I am a control freak, I want the paper and the paint to do its own thing and to take me out of the process. So what I will do is I'll be painting just water onto the paper, and then I'll be dabbing the pigments in. And for this piece, I'm doing in red, white, and blue, and I just kind of dab the paper in, dab the paint in, and I let it run on its own to take me kind of out of the process. I want it to run and look natural and surprise me. I'm painting Chief Thunderwater. This is actually the only painting that I have done where I'm revisiting a subject that I've already done. I did an acrylic version of this in 2016 for the Cleveland Museum of Art staff show. And at the time, it was done as a kind of statement against Chief Wahoo as a racist image. And the connection that I have here is that Chief Thunderwater is my son's great, 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 possibly some more greats than their grandfather on his mother's side. And so the image that I have here, I got the original photograph from the family, and the project was done with their blessing. And so I did this for the staff art show. It also showed at Stella's Art Gallery when it was in the Matchworks building in Mentor. And I'm revisiting it again because my son put up a petition to have, since the Cleveland Indians announced they were going to change their name, my son put up a petition online to have the name changed to Cleveland Thunder. And while he's not advocating for any use of Native American imagery and to get it completely out, it does have this history connected with it, because Thunderwater is buried across the street from Progressive Field at the Erie Street Cemetery. And the other thing going on is that the Erie Street Cemetery, several historical societies are working to get the cemetery restored. So you'd have a kind of a link to the past without actually being appropriative. And you move forward with what is essentially a very, very neutral name. Thunderwater himself was a fan of the Cleveland Indians, a supporter of the Cleveland Indians. Threw out a number of first pitches, dressed in full regalia. And he claimed to have a vision that he knew the Indians would win the 48 World Series. And he said before the game, may the best Warriors win as long as they're Cleveland. And I understand that there's a book coming out about him next year. I don't know the author, so this isn't a plug for the book, but he was an interesting guy. He was part of Bill Cody's Wild West show. He was a supreme piece of chief, and he did a lot of activist work with the US and Canadian governments for Native Americans. And he was working, he believed that they should have a reservation, a nation, and he was fighting to get that as part of like a own territory about the size of Texas, I think is what he wanted. So very interesting guy. Q-tips are one of the tools that I use. I'll use them to blot and dab if there's a little bit too much water or too much paint, or if I get enough paint on it, I'll use it to paint with these from time to time. I have Michelle's list of questions that I'll talk about in a little bit. One thing that Michelle doesn't know, I don't think, about me, is that when I went to college for the third time, I went to Kent State, and my plan had been to get my bachelor's degree in art education at Kent, and then go on to get an art therapy degree and get my master's in art therapy. So I'm really grateful. Obviously, that didn't happen because I'm not an art therapist. I'm really grateful to be a part of this. Michelle has this trust in me to be here. Unlike a lot of the artists who you're seeing tonight, I don't have a lot of production. I've worked full-time and very often more than full-time jobs over the last 20, 30 years. And so I produce when I can. When COVID hit, I was an essential worker. I used to work security for the Cleveland Museum of Art, and I spent a lot of hours there. And then when staff reductions had to happen, unfortunately, as a event security manager, and there's no events, kind of knew where that was going. So I had a long talk with my wife and my family, my kids, and my kids are being virtually schooled. And my wife works from home. And the consensus was pretty much, since you're going to be home anyway, we want you to focus on making art. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been a part of group shows. I've done 3 shows, staff art shows with Cleveland Museum of Art. And I've done 3 shows at Stella's Art Gallery, which was formerly in Mentor and has moved to Willoughby. It's a beautiful building that they're in, and it's a nice new facility. And I hope to be doing some more work with them soon. When I was young, I wanted to be an animator for Disney. And those were my original goals when I wanted to go to art school when I was young. When I finally went back to college in my late 20s, the idea of potentially being a starving artist had much less appeal, which is why I went for art education and art therapy. And where I ended up, I was putting myself through college and I was working in a frame shop for one of the big box stores. And there was an opportunity to work at the corporate office. And I applied for it in my final semester at Kent. And that's where I ended up going and spent the next several years traveling and teaching custom framing and teaching people good design. And some wonderful experiences came out of that. A lot of hardship, life on the road. I'm sorry, you didn't hear that?
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to let you know that Megan had commented on your video saying, so cool.
Well, thank you, Megan. So, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but one of the reasons I do this painting this way is because I am kind of a control freak. And by putting the pigments directly in the water and letting it run everywhere, I'm not allowed to be a control freak. The paint won't let me. So I have to live with whatever I get. And I keep with me, right next to where I'm working, I have a big roll of paper towels for massive mistakes when I need to just erase everything and go thermonuclear on it. And Kleenex for some smaller mistakes. And of course, you saw my Q-tip earlier. I mean, there's just a little bit too much water pooling. I have 3 jars on my table right now. One has completely clean water in it. One is going to be for the blue water, cleaning the brush that I'm using for the blue. And the other will be for the red when I start putting that back in. And then behind me on my cedar chest is where I keep my mug of tea. Anybody who followed my Instagram today, I told the story of why I use clear jars because I used to use old coffee mugs, and I mistook my coffee mug for my paint jar and then got a mouthful of paint. So we don't use coffee mugs anymore. My Q-tips are in the coffee mug. And I work with painfully small brushes for this process.
So, Jeffrey, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Where do you get ideas for your artwork?
Well, the the one that I'm working, the original idea came from, I had listened to NPR on my way into work, and they were doing a story about Chief Wahoo and saying that Chief Wahoo was racist. And I grew up with the Indians and was all offended by that and didn't like that idea. And then somebody walked. I was working as a guard. I wasn't a manager yet. I was working as a guard for the museum, and somebody walked in, and they had a Chief Wahoo hat on, and I just kind of looked at it, and suddenly my brain went, "Oh yeah, it is. That's not good." Um, when I did a painting in 2013. It was actually the first painting that I showed publicly in probably 20 years. Um, I did a painting called it was No Vagina, No Opinion. And it was obviously it's a feminist kind of slant. And that one came from a Facebook post. A friend of mine had gone to a pro-choice rally, and I was raised Catholic, and so I had questions. And so it started with just me asking questions. So I think a lot of what I do comes from me asking questions about the world. And sometimes it's not so much that I'm making statements about any one thing, it's I'm questioning everything. Um, and then it can come from odd places. I did a painting in 2018 called Willful Blindness. And it's a self-portrait, and it was an acrylic on canvas, but then I used on top of that um, denim, which I spray painted my portrait on. And the denim had been ripped from a pair of jeans that I had, and I drove around with this rip in my jeans, like a piece of fabric, um, in my car for months, trying to decide what I was going to do with it. And it was just soft and frayed, and I didn't know what it was going to be, but I just hung on to it. And I would drive around and I'd be at stoplights just playing with this denim because I knew it had another life. And so the final piece was ripped denim over this heavily abstract background, and then my portrait spray painted on top. And then on top of that, where my eyes would have been, I put on a blindfold that I tacked through the eyes. And it said on the blindfold, um, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So it's the news, a lot of different sources, or sometimes it's finding something that's pretty or interesting, or I just like a visual of one particular thing. Among the list of questions that we were given to start was what music do I like to listen to? And I don't have a particular type of music that I like to listen to. I don't even always listen to music when I'm working. Sometimes it's podcasts. Sometimes I'll watch TV shows on my iPad. While I was doing the pre-work on this painting all week, I got through, I think, most of the season of White Collar on Amazon Prime. There's nothing like watching a TV show about an art forger while you're making a painting. I also tend to stick brushes in my mouth a lot. which also has been known to have some unpleasant side effects because sometimes I stick the paint part into my mouth. I'm sure that's not healthy. Sorry?
Sorry about that. I didn't want to interrupt you. There's a couple of comments here on the Facebook page I want to share with you.
Sure.
So Josie had commented, "Please don't drink the paint water." And then Bryce had commented, "This is awesome, great work."
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so do you mind if I ask you another question?
Go right ahead.
What artists do you admire or get inspiration from?
That is an awfully long list. I've been looking at, as this particular week, I was looking at a lot of Alphonse Mucha, the Art Nouveau guy. I also had out a book on Patrick Nagel, which everybody knows as the Duran Duran artist from the 80s, and whose work is sadly on nail salons everywhere. But when you look at it, he was so brilliant at forcing 3 dimensions out of 2-dimensional space, and he worked with line and really flat colors and still got these fantastic effects. Such a shame that he died so young. I also really like the museum. Just before I left, got a painting as part of the Keithley collection that was by Henry Edmund Cross, French, so I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. And it's pointillist. So I like George Seurat. I like the pointillists. It's kind of what I'm doing here with the watercolor and just dabbing. There's a lot of pointillists inspiration in this. Nita Engel, who's a master watercolorist. I'm currently reading her book for inspiration as I'm making this change from acrylics to watercolors. You think who else? I loved the work of Steve Hanks, who started his career as a oil painter and then developed an allergy to the oil paints and had to adapt everything he knew to watercolors. And I love John Singer Sargent, who's also known as the portrait painter of the Gilded Age, but he also did some fantastic watercolor paintings too. Who else? I grew up, so I got into art because I was a pretty sick kid. I was in the hospital a lot and in my bed a lot. Had real bad asthma as a kid. I still have asthma now. And I got into it because that's where I was. And so I have a love of cartoons and cartoonists and Disney and comic book artists. And I was kind of a giant comic book nerd. So I kind of have this love of line and flat color And when I originally wanted to go to college, when I was leaving high school, my goal was to be an animator for Disney. So I kind of landed in a really sort of different space. And I hope everybody can see the Chief's face starting to come out. So right here in this part of the painting, this will be white when it's all done. Right now it has masking fluid on it, which dried and is kind of a tacky surface. Water won't stick to it, paint won't stick to it. And when it's all done, I'll use it's kind of like almost like an eraser, and I'll use that to pull that up. And I hope I get this done with enough time that you all can watch that, because if you've ever seen those So Satisfying videos, which my daughter is obsessed with, it really is very satisfying to just watch the masking fluid come up in this, if I'm lucky, in a solid form. I mentioned that I stretched the paper, which you get the paper completely wet because you want to work on a flat surface and the paper is going to buckle. And I used, first time I did this here in my home, I'm using a lot of what I have around, and we did a lot of remodeling in this condo before we moved into it. And so I had painter's tape. And the first time I did it, the painter's tape held really well. And then when I removed it, it ripped the paper up terribly. So that was not a good solution. And the second time I did it, when I showed the example a minute ago, I used just plain old masking tape. And while the masking tape didn't rip up the paper, it also didn't hold real well. And so I got a lot of really bad buckling. So what you see here is masking tape right up against the paper, and then the painter's tape holding the masking tape in place. And so far, that is working really well for me. Time for another drink. Again, I also keep my drinks back on the cedar chest at the end of my bed so that I don't make the mistake of drinking paint water again. You do that once and you tend to not forget it. And I think stylistically, with this kind of blocky style, which is remnant from the original acrylic painting, I think I had just watched a Banksy documentary, and I was like, oh, I got to try that. I got to see if I can make that work. Got a little dry already. So I have painted, or I've drawn, or I've created art pretty much my whole life, off and on, sometimes more on than, or more off than on than I would like.
Hey, Jeff. So we have a question from
Yes.
our Facebook page here from Robbie asking if you're able to hold your piece up to the camera.
Well, I can do kind of that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it's wet, so it's probably not the smartest thing to do to lift it up, but
Yeah, I don't want to tilt it too much because then it'll run everywhere. See if I can get you a little bit closer so you can get a better view.
yes, that's awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Um, from my end, you guys are on my phone, so it's hard for me to tell just how good your view is.
Yeah, we actually can see it very well. So you are
Good.
so thank you.
When I'm not painting, I also do photography, different kinds of photography. I've done wedding and a hand fasting, and I really enjoy taking pictures of abandoned houses, especially when they're really badly decayed and collapsing in on themselves. Um, I showed one of those at a show at Stella's as well.
So I have a question for you, Jeffrey.
Yes,
How has your artwork changed over time?
I've mentioned that I used to be, well, I didn't used to be, I am a complete control freak. Um, if I'm not obsessive compulsive, if I don't have obsessive compulsive disorder, then I definitely have an obsessive compulsive personality. And what I used to do was really, really very tight drawings, really, really very tight paintings. Um, I think I was going for photorealism pretty much all the time. And so going into this really loose style where I have a lack of control over um, a lot of this process. Like the drawing is still pretty, the original drawing is still pretty tight, but then I start painting in this way and I lose some of the control over it. And you just kind of have to let go and trust the process. I also originally wanted to be a cartoonist along with being an animator. So in my heart, I think I'm still a cartoonist at heart, but I don't do as much of that type of thing anymore. And then switching from acrylics, where I worked with a palette knife, um, has definitely, switching from acrylics to watercolor has definitely had an impact on it right there. Because you're talking about a medium that is completely dependent on water and what it's going to do. And with watercolor, and it's transparent, in a medium that you can lay on really thick, and I would almost trowel it on so that I would have these large areas that were um, flat colors, but it was done with that palette knife. And even with the flat colors, it starts, you get all this texture out of it. And you can't get texture the same way with a watercolor. I mean, there are ways to make it look like it's textured, but actually texturing is a little bit more difficult. So on the weeks when I don't have my kids with me, I work in here in the bedroom, my little bedroom studio. Um, my wife's home office, because she's working from home, is set up on the other side of her bedroom. So pretty much every wall of this room has something on it. And then on the weeks when my kids are with me, I have a portable easel, and I'll take my supplies into the kitchen so that I'm available for when the kids need something. They have questions, problems with homework, problems with schoolwork. They don't know how to microwave their soup. I'm out there to help with all those things. And if you can't hear it, one of my cats is now crying at the door because she wants to come in. And she'll probably sit out there and yell at me. But if I let her in, she'll jump up and headbutt my hand while I'm working because she wants me to pet her. And we don't want that to happen. So as I'm working, and I'm working in areas where the colors have dried, I kind of run the brush back over to reactivate it a bit so it blends a little. And that way we don't have this kind of solid line. You can see where the paint is dried and the water's dried, where between the red and the yellow, the red and the blues. And we don't want that in the middle of our blue. It doesn't look good. You reactivate it and it bleeds again. We'll sit here and pop at it. And in a second, when we're done with these really close together parts, we'll move to a slightly larger brush. And this won't be quite as slow going. We'll get the blue done, and then we'll go back in and do the red. Now we're going to get to move a little quicker. And I'm stressing a little quicker because it's still kind of a small brush, but I want these dots to be visible like pointillism. I want the brush strokes to kind of both be visible. So you've got some areas of interest instead of just a big flat color. But also I want them to do their own thing. Except where it's right up against the line, because then I want that line to be there. So hopefully at this point, you all can see the chief's face, and it's come out. Because in a minute, I'm going to turn the board upside down so I can put in the red, and I'm not working over the wet areas that I've just done. Oh, this is my blue. These two out of my way so I don't get them confused. And this is where we are so far. So I'm going to turn it around and start putting the reds in.
That looks absolutely stunning.
Well, thank you. As I got kind of freer with my colors, I think my college professors would be so happy with me. As I got freer with my colors, I still wanted people to look at my work and say, well, he can draw. And I still want to be able to get decent likenesses. What's fun and a little tricky about this is that each pigment reacts a little differently. And I'm using the same brand, but the red tends to come out really, really intense. It's a little more intense than I want. And it tends to flow a little bit more than the blue does. So I'm going to switch to
So I just want to let you know that we are at our 10-minute mark.
okay.
If you want to let everybody know the best ways to stay updated with your work, or if you have any plugins, now would be a great time to let everybody know what the best way to keep up to date with you would be.
Oh, right now, the best way to keep up to date with me is to follow me on Instagram. You can find me at Jeffrey Vano Art on Instagram. And Jeffrey is spelled Jeffrey. I don't have any shows coming up, but I'm going to be working on my own stuff to get ready for entering some shows and showing to galleries and getting myself out there now that I am not working full time and I have the time to do this. Which again, thanks to my kids and my lovely wife for supporting me with this. I think a better way of saying that is for demanding that I do this. I am close. I get pretty close to timing how long it would take me to finish this. And if I don't quite finish this by the end of our hour, which I don't think I will also put up photos and video on my Instagram of me working on this. I'll also give a plug for my son. If you're interested, go to change.org and look for Cleveland Thunder to change the Indians' name to that, to honor our supreme piece of, let me try that again, to honor our supreme chief of peace. Not appropriate native imagery.
So, Jeffrey, we have about 3 minutes left here.
Okay.
I wanted to ask if you had any wise words or words of encouragement to young artists who are finding themselves, maybe comparing themselves to artwork such as yours. If you have any wise words for those that are in the beginning of their artistic journeys.
I think the best thing I can say to anybody is just don't give up. Like I said, most of my adult career, I've worked non-art related jobs. But even when I was traveling the country, I always kept a sketchbook with me, um, so that I could do doodles or sketches. Or being an artist is something you feel in your soul, and it's kind of the definition of who you are. And if you give it up, a little part of you dies with that. And don't let that happen. Things are going to be tough. It's never going to be as easy as you want it to be. There's going to be days when you feel like just chucking it all. There have been plenty of times where I've been like, I'm just going to throw it all away. I'm never going to work again. Usually I've got people around me wise enough to know that that's a bad idea, mostly my wife and my kids.
Well, it's been such an honor to watch you work, and thank you so much for taking the time to spend an hour with us and being here with us. We truly appreciate your support and being able to take part in your little space here.
Thank you for inviting me into this, and thank you for everything that you do. Dab this off a little bit because that's strong, but this is where it is, and I will send you guys the finished photo so it can go up on the site. I'll keep working on it through the night, and thank you all for joining me and for watching. Just Art Therapy Studios. Thank you for the opportunity.